feel special.
Right?
What?
Welcome. Can you tell that we are excited to be here?
Let's go.
I can tell that you all are excited to be here. And I just have to say, I'm really, really grateful to all of these panelists for saying thank you to me. So I just want to say that really quickly. But I don't want to take up a lot of time because we decided last night we want to get right to the work, right? And so you have our bios. And I'm going to jump into our questions that we, decided we're going to talk about. So what we'll do is we'll spend some time talking about the practice, theorizing about the practice based on our experiences, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to do some practicing yourself, right? Okay, so our first question is, why is fundraising so difficult?
Can I start it off?
Go.
So, all right, cool. I hope it's on. But I feel like fundraising is so difficult. So
Is this one? Yeah. Try it.
hey, let's go. Hi, folks. So I am about a year and a half into the fundraising profession, so it's all very new to me. I'm also fresh out of grad school, so it's extra new to me. Thank you. And I remember going into all my fundraising classes, and the hardest thing about it is not understanding like what money means to me, And I think that's always been one of the big conversations we had in our classes, understanding what money means to you, and that's going to change, or that's going to determine how you talk about money to other people. So like for me, in my upbringing, you didn't ask for a lot of help for money. It's like there's like a pride thing about it. So then going in and then having to ask people for several $1,000 gifts for my organization is very hard for me to do. Whereas with my supervisor, who has like a lot of more experience than I do, so a lot of it's based on that, but she can just text somebody and be like, hey, you're gonna give $10,000 to the campaign this year? And they'll be like, yeah, sure, bet. And then I'm like, how do you do that? So I think it is hard because a lot of people don't understand what money means to them.
Feedback. No, it's an echo. You don't hear an echo? I heard an echo. No? Okay. I'm also a musician. But anyways, it's like you said, it's cultural, partially. In the United States, people don't talk about money. I talk to my friends about how much they make. I give them advice on how to get a raise, because I talk about money for a living. But also, I also tell all my friends who are like, how do you get money? I was like, I never ask people for money. What are you talking about? I just tell people how you can support me and the work we do. And in order to do this work, it costs money, right? I never am asking people for their last dime, right? If someone wants to give me their last dime, I'm not going to be like, no, I'm going to take it graciously because they gave, because it fulfills something for them, right? But I'm just telling people how they can support the work we do. And a lot of times they're like, well, how much does that cost? So they enter the conversation of money. And then I have all the stats and all the budget in my mind, right? But in the end, what I need to know is, what do we do? What's the impact of we do? And I need to be able to tell stories around that. So it's not about asking for money, which what intimidates people the most, I think. It's about expressing what you do and how you do it.
I was going to say that I think people are afraid of raising money because of two things. One, they're afraid of rejection, which is really something that is challenging to cope with, not just in fundraising, but in life. And then two, I think that fundraising is challenging because we realize that we might not be in a position of power and or privilege. And I think that is also really difficult as well. Particularly when you're dealing with foundation folks, we are understanding that there are power dynamics that are outside of one's control. Regardless of one's identity, you understand that there are these power differentials, and that is uncomfortable.
What I was going to say also a little bit is that it is cultural, and I think everybody has to decide for themselves, like, what culture do I come from? What is my family culture, my community around money? And how does that inform what I do? And then once you know why you think that, then you can start doing the work to sort of, how do I ask? And what are the things that I need, and how do I show what we're doing and our impact. But you yourself have to be extremely comfortable with it, and that's all based on who you are, where you come from, and what is the relationship in the community with money. And based on what you just said about the power dynamic too, I think it's so important to understand that, yes, there is a power dynamic between the funder and the grantee, but let me be very clear, they need you as much as you need them. And when you go into that knowing that, and you come from a position of that, it's not an arrogance, it's not hubris, it's I know what I do, and it's important because they have stakeholders just like you do. They have boards, and they have people who support them and people who are looking at them. And when you know that and you understand that, it's easier to stand toe-to-toe with somebody whether you're asking for $5,000 or $5 million.
And I will add at the individual level, is this on? Yeah. Okay. At the individual level, you're building a relationship. It's never, at every level actually, it's building relationships. I work with foundations and government, and it's people, right? I'm not just asking for money randomly. I've had a conversation typically. But at the individual level, you've had conversations. There's a cycle, cultivation cycle when you're in the business, but you don't just meet somebody for the first time and you're like, can you give me $1 million, right? I mean, I might, but that's after like a bit. Right, but you generally had conversations to find out their interests and why they've come to you or why you're having this conversation. You found out how much money they make as well, how much money they have. I'll go and see what's available publicly, right? If I live in Miami, I'm going to see how many boats you got, right? And so you have an idea when you're asking. Relationships come first.
Absolutely.
And you're alluding to the importance of research, and I want to pivot back to something else I heard kind of a theme about, is this overhead myth, right? So it does not do you service if you don't tell the true story of how much it costs to do the work that you're trying to do, right? It costs money to achieve your missions, and it's really good to convey that to all of the funders you could potentially be working back. Now, back to research. In addition to research, what else do people need to do to fundraise effectively in the creative sector? Because, fundraising for a church is different than, an arts organization.
Oh, everybody has their priorities. Everybody, individual, government, at every level has their priorities. And it is your job to figure out whether your priorities fit with their priorities, whether your mission fits with their priorities. And also to talk to people, because what's on the website is not the end of everything, right? Ever. You need to find out whether they're even accepting solicitation, right? So sometimes you could send letters to family foundations and they don't even, send you a letter back. Now, I've had conversations where people lie to your face and tell you that they do, but not everybody does. It requires research. You have to, the breadth of research is wild. Google is your friend. You can learn a lot. Also, before you take money, you better Google people if it's individual. You can look at criminal records. Naxos is a wonderful thing if you have access to Naxos. If you have friends who have access to that stuff, friends are great. But also, like I said, property records. You really shouldn't go blindly into any of your funding at any level.
Sure. I was going to say there that every fundraiser and every organization needs to have some readiness before even applying for a grant. I often talk about these as grant Legos. And so these are your tiny case statements that are packaged together, like why should you support this program, why you should support that program. And you should have all of these tiny narratives living in these different places that are also tied with your outcomes, that are tied with your outputs. Outcomes and outputs are different, right? How you're changing the world, and then the measurement of how you're changing the world. So making sure that those are coupled together. And then in this way, when you have these all written, maybe in a Google document of mission, maybe in a Google document of the violin program, the choir program, the whatever program, then you're able to move these Legos, these grant Legos around as you're beginning to grant write and when you're beginning to have conversations with funders. So you need to have that level of readiness. And so a lot of times, a lot of people, we were saying last night, they want to skip steps. And the thing is, you can't skip steps in fundraising. That is something that you have to do. So I would encourage everyone, and this is not research, this is not outreach, this is in-reach. This is trying to figure out why it is that you say that you do what you do and making sure that you're convinced and by the data that you have presented and you have that ready to go.
I was also going to say, know what you're asking for. So many people get opportunities at different times and they get kind of befuddled or they're not ready for it. You have to know what you're asking for and why. Because if a funder says to you, so why should I do that? Based on what Arreon was just saying, like, you have to know why. And it's not like they're putting you on, it's not confrontational, it's a competition for the money. And a lot of times you have to realize that you are being measured by someone who's looking at a rubric or something to say this person wants something, well, so does X and so does Y. So you have to make sure yours is compelling, that it's always going back to your mission, and that it's showing exactly what he was saying, the output and the outcomes. A lot of times you can get feedback if you do not get the funding. That's also a really helpful thing to have, because sometimes if you don't get it, it's not by much. It's just that maybe somebody else had something more compelling. And once you've spoken to them, they know that you're real about building the relationship. So that's another level to start with that relationship. A no is not always bad. A no could be not right now.
One first, like, piggyback off of that. So the organization that I work for, if you haven't looked at the bios, I work for ArtsWave in Cincinnati. We're a United Arts Fund, and we have several project grants that go out to so many arts organizations and individual artists, and we have so many grant programs. So a lot of times, yeah, we'll get applications for a specific grant program, but we find that it's not really a great candidate for that grant program, but we do our best to then try to pair them with another one that they might be qualified for, and we try to like establish that working relationship with them. So yeah, a no is not always bad. It could be that funder is not the best partner for whatever it is that you're trying to do. And I want to kind of tie that into like what you were talking about with storytelling. I feel like so much about fundraising, what I've been learning is the storytelling. So I go into like all these different companies and I have to talk to like their staff and talk about like what it is about the arts. And there's the preparedness that you have to have as an organization as to what it is that you do. And it's your job too as a fundraiser or somebody who wants to support your fundraising colleagues to help create that messaging, create like, what program is it that we need to highlight that's going to reach out to this company? What program or what statistic do we have about like the general, like for instance, I'm thinking about economic impact because we just published the results of a big economic impact study in Cincinnati of the arts. But like that kind of stuff, like those numbers that you can show what's going to resonate with those people. It's the storytelling and how do you message that,
Just one other thing. So we talked about readiness, we talked about research, we talked about storytelling. Just recapping these in case you're trying to write these down. But the other thing is funders also want to have trust and faith in you as the person who's going to execute that project. I have been told so many times how much the leadership potential of the individual has had an influence on the outcome. So that's really important to keep in mind. And so sometimes that means that a fundraiser, if you are the primary fundraiser, you might need to work with the person who is executing that program, who might be able to talk about how they are going to actually execute that program. But do know that folks who are giving money are definitely looking at your leadership potential, and if you're someone who's going to do what they said they're going to do.
I will add at the individual level, your level of preparation and knowledge has a lot to do with whether individuals trust you enough to give you money. Especially at larger dollars, people take for granted how much individuals want to know that you know the statistics behind your programming, the cost behind your programming. They want to know the stories, but the people who have family foundations that will give you $50,000, they want to know the metric impact a lot of the time. So part of your job internally is to be talking to your program team regularly to get the stories, but also to find out what future things they want funded and to understand the path there as well, so that when you're expressing this to donors, it makes sense. They can trust you. You cannot pull things out of your ass.
And so really quickly, what I want to also shine a light on is that we're talking about we're moving into how you have to approach corporations, foundations, government, and individuals differently. Like you have to cater approaches to each of them. It's kind of like, your resume. You wouldn't send the same resume to the same company or the same cover letter, right, without actually doing the work to shape the cover letter in such a way so that it speaks to the person that you're trying to get the interview from.
Yeah, because we spoke about individuals and we were speaking about foundations. Government is very interesting. I work primarily in New York City, and it's a very robust arts funding community. It's a huge amount of competition. The organization that I represent, we are sort of small to mid-size, but we're competing with the Met Opera, and we're competing with the New York Phil, and all of these large things. And large entities that have been around for a long time. But one of the things that I get feedback when I'm meeting with government officials and staffers is that do what you say you're going to do. Also, go into communities where people aren't doing these things. You don't want 6 people from the same community trying to have the same program. So a lot of that is knowing what's not happening in your community and what are those gaps and what is it that you are already doing that can fill those gaps. I'm not telling you to start something brand new. It's a lot of competition with government. It can also be laborious, and a lot of times it's about capacity issues for smaller nonprofits and also individual artists. But look to create collectives and groups of people together so you can work together, or projects where you can work together, because sometimes it can be a lot, but there is a big movement, at least in where we are, of really trying to reach out to communities that have not been getting funding. And in the city, there's such a huge turnover with city council and the personnel on city councils. You kind of have to know when you're dealing with government, you got to know what's going on in your city on some level, whether it's your city, whether it's your county, whether it's your state, because those people directly influence arts funding. They can give you a grant, they cannot give you the grant, they can make sure the funding is there. So you do have to have an awareness and you don't have to become an arts advocate, but you do need to know what's going on so you can distill it for yourself. Everyone in here is an artist or an arts administrator. You can all think for yourself. You know what you like. You know what you don't like. You also know the communities that you serve and what are the things that they need. So keep all that stuff. The government is a little bit trickier than individuals and foundation.
It's tedious.
And it can be tedious, yes, it can be tedious. But I will say this, there are always ways to get around the tediousness once you know what the system is.
I was going to say that when I think of government, I think you need to also think about when things are worth it and not worth it.
Yes.
Government is very detail-oriented. Government doesn't have much flexibility. You need to look at the guidelines, look at how they're measuring these guidelines, because it's usually a panel when it's government, and decide whether the lift is worth the effort. And I know as a person that works for Sphinx, an organization of color, it's not always worth the effort when it comes to government. Sometimes what they ask you back is too much work for your capacity, especially if you're a small organization. You have to look at what they expect from you on the back end. Maybe you don't have the capacity to do what is necessary to fulfill the grant requirements. So in government, always look at the full thing before you start. You might not even qualify. Sometimes you got to be an organization for at least 3 years, and people are trying to apply, in year one, or they don't have 501c3 status, but they're trying to apply to government. The rest of the options generally have more flexibility. Government doesn't. But government officers, just like everything else, it will talk to you.
Yes.
It's a relationship. Go talk to the people on the council, the grant manager. Go talk to them, and they can tell you whether you qualify, whether you need to do this, and to get there. And a lot of them will actually help you fill out the grant. Whereas other foundations and things, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And then that's not just with government. You just got to know sometimes when no is the best answer.
Absolutely, because sometimes there are no's. And just last thing with government, when something says discretionary funding, that means that person can give you that money. So look also for discretionary funding, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go through that you go through the same process, but discretionary means that government personnel has the discretion to give you that money. So then that's where you have to work to build that relationship.
Okay, so before we start practicing, I want to ask you all, what are your strategies for optimizing a no to a yes, and an enthusiastic yes? Because we talked about, how devastating a no can be, right? But a no is also an opportunity to continue relationship building as well. So how do you turn that no into a yes?
So I'm not going to be a Debbie Downer. But what I will say is that when you get a no, outside of you dealing with the rejection, you have to think, is this a no where I'm going to put more work in and build this relationship? Or is this a no where I need to move on to someone else? And I've had to do that, and it's a tough call, and it's probably 50-50 with when I go and build a relationship and then I move forward. But when a person tells me no, I try to get feedback, but then I also think about, was this a good match from the beginning? Because it's kind of like what you were saying about Legos. Some things don't fit. And if what they're asking for and the research that you're done and that's been done, and also now a lot of foundations in particular are doing a lot of changing of their priorities. I know we've all heard those words. And so think about, with the no, is this a fit? Is this a good fit for me? And lastly, just do the work. You'd be surprised when you do the work and you do try to keep the relationship, people still are watching you, because even if they said no, they still know your name. They still know what you're doing.
So the way my company fundraises is very different, because we run workplace campaigns like United Way. To show of hands, how many of y'all were familiar with United Way? Because I was not until grad school. Cool. So if you're not familiar with United Way, it's a big blanket organization that raises a bunch of money to fund other nonprofits to do very important social work. My United Arts Fund is very similar. We raise a bunch of money to support lots of organizations to do art. And so when I think of no, I've had several no's lately, just in terms of companies who are feeling down about the economy, worried about inflation, all those kinds of yada, yada, yada things. That's valid for them to be concerned about, and for us to also be concerned about as well. But for me, when I think of no, I don't think that that's still an excuse to not engage with them in some capacity. As you're saying, keep doing what you're doing, keep doing the work that we're doing. But we can still try to find ways where we can engage a volunteer for me, the company volunteer who runs those campaigns. I can still engage with them, give them a good experience with my company, give them a good experience with your art, and then still develop that relationship, because all fundraising is developing that relationship. You're building that connection, and it's when we're talking about with trust, it's making sure that there's still that trust, that they know that even you can still do whatever it is that you can do without their funding, you know, and then they're going to want to get on top of that train. You know what I mean?
To add what, I mean, you guys basically said it. Like when you get a no, which I was thinking, like, when was my last no? I remember my last no now, but it's just because I don't put all my eggs in one basket, right? Like that would be, it would make any no devastating, right? You've got to have a whole fundraising plan that includes many options because, like we said, priorities change. I could lose $650K tomorrow. I got to have another way to make up that $650K, right? The programs don't stop. So I've got to have we have portfolios of people, right? Individual, you know, when I worked at the university level, that was 200 people in a portfolio, right? You've got to have multiple options for funding in a year. It can't just be you're asking 5 people and the same 5 people at that. You have to have options always. That's what research is for. And when new stuff comes, you know, that's a beacon of light because it's usually everybody going for the same dollars, right? And then also, I find like if I am out experiencing art, other people that I may have told me no see me in the streets, right? And they're like, oh, this person is like all about art in our community, right? So they keep me in their mind. You know, I believe in the arts as a whole. You know, I work for Sync, so I'm all over, and I go see art wherever I go. You know, we were just talking about the Met, and I was like, the last opera I enjoyed was Fire Showed Up in the Bones. X bored the crap out of me. I'm good for leaving things that bore me, but I'm there, right? And so people in the arts, when they support the art, they're there, so they see you. So even if they say no, they're like, oh, I remember this person. Next time they have something, they're like, let's go back to this person.
Yeah, I totally agree with that being present in the community part because the more you get to know someone, the more difficult it is to say no to their requests when you become familiar with them as people. So I don't underestimate the power of that. I do always ask for feedback whenever possible. Some folks will say that they won't give feedback for whatever reasons. I then try to not say, oh, can you give me some feedback or whatever, but it's like, great, wonderful. We're already going to start thinking about what we're going to do for the next year, and we want to begin thinking about what your priorities are going to be. And if you could help us, if you could help clarify what your priorities are going to be for the next one, and then that is how you get into that year-round conversation. If you're not having a year-round conversation, then you are likely to get a no, right? Because we were saying a cold call from anyone is not exactly what you want to do. And then the other part about a no is that some of the no's should be anticipated no's. I just want to be clear that if you're not getting enough no's, then you are not taking enough calculated risks. And so you do need to have a certain tolerance to hear no, otherwise you're never stretching yourself. So I just want to make sure that you are aware of that. And then sometimes that calculated risk is, hey, guess what? I know that the Wallace Foundation doesn't know who this new organization is, but let me tell you this, I am going to go and put that LOI in because my name's going to be in your mouth. And so like sometimes you absolutely need to do that, but you have to be strategic about how you decide to do that, knowing that your first bite at that apple might not be successful, but it might be on that second or third time. You shouldn't be doing this for everybody, right? But it is a calculated sort of thing that you need to consider in your strategy.
Okay, I hope you all are ready to practice. So we're calling this the ask. And each of our panelists are going to join you out at the tables. And here's what we want you to do. Identify a corporate, foundation, government, or individual donor to ask for a gift. Ask yourself, does the prospect have the capacity to give, right? We know, like Ford, Mellon, Wallace, some of those folks, we know them. Mackenzie Scott, she is brilliantly disruptive to the whole philanthropic system. And then, does the prospect have the inclination to give? Like, do you know that if they've given to the arts before? If you can answer yes to both questions, proceed to number 3. Select one of the types of funding in the second column. Determine how much you would ask the donor to give and why you would ask them to give. And then with a partner, role play asking your prospect donor to give a gift to your organization. Does everyone understand what we're asking you to do? Okay, and we're gonna do like kind of like a speed asking for the role play, and I'm gonna keep time, right? So you ready? Let's go.
Moving into the crowd. Yes, yes, we're moving, we're moving, we're moving.
So I hate to bring our practice to a close, but we are at the 1 minute mark. But we still have 10 minutes for questions. So if the panelists will come back and join me, we are happy to receive questions from all of you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. Can you hear me all right? Hello, hello, party people. My name is Jalen. I'm your Q&A helper today. So if you have a question, feel free to come up to the mic and say whatever you want. Also, I did want to let you guys know that we do have a digital option as well. If you go to the Sphinx Connect app and you click convening schedule, and then you click our session, a page will pop up and it'll say, ask me a question. And you just click that and it'll direct you to our Q&A app. And you can just type in whatever questions you have and like any questions that you feel you would like to have answered. And with this iPad, I'll just choose the most popular question and ask it. And then we'll also alternate between the live questions. Thanks, guys.
Hello, my name is Millie Herod. I work for the National Flute Association. Thank you so much for all of your knowledge. So I am, I thought this thing was funny because technically my title is not fundraising, but because I have fundraising experience, I just end up fundraising every day of my life anyway. So anyway, that's my own thing. But so I do frequently get asked, and I think about this regularly, especially now that I have gone from my first job, $9 million organization, down to like a $2 million organization. So my question is, I know some of y'all work for like larger organizations, so I'm thinking more like smaller and medium-sized organizations. What trends are you seeing in terms of funding? So at most organizations that I've worked at, I've seen we've gotten more money basically from doing more work through individual donors versus corporations, government, and grants. So I guess my question is, what trends are you seeing? And do you think it's right now, I don't know if you have like a blanket answer, but like, should we be spending more time on individuals? Should we be spending more time on grants? I know it's going to be different for everybody, but personally, I feel like I see a trend more towards going through individual giving versus family foundations and corporations and stuff. But so you can answer that.
It's so funny that you say that because we're just talking about the statistics, and I'm a crazy nut about statistics. For small and medium-sized organizations and large organizations, they are not the same. First and foremost, is one of the things that you have to realize. So overall, there are more people. There is more money flowing from individuals, right? Absolutely. So 60% of what is going out in charitable dollars is coming from individuals. But if you were to take a look at that pie, a lot of that is going to religious institutions and higher eds and hospitals. So those are the biggest ones there. And then there are the legacy cultural organizations, which are those large, the Met,
the museums,
those sort of places.
Botanic Gardens.
Those parks, right. That is very different for small to mid-sized organizations. Small to mid-sized organizations are much more likely to have a larger percentage of their budget, almost 40% of their budgets coming from foundation grants. So that is something for you to be aware of. But the thing is, you want to have a diverse portfolio across the board, period. So here are the things that you want to strive to have as any organization, but particularly for small and mid-sized organization. You're really looking to have foundation giving. You're looking for corporate giving, which a lot of people thought was going away, but has actually increased since 2020. And the majority of those dollars are ADEI-related giving dollars right now. So keep that in mind. You also want to have, like, of course, your tickets and stuff, which will never ever keep your lights on. If you think you're going to sell enough
Right.
tickets, it's a lie.
Amen.
It is a lie. And then the other thing you want to start thinking about is other kinds of earned revenue. How are you creating contracts? Like a lot of people are thinking about, oh, government funding. Government funding is great for grants, but you can also have government contracts because the government is not able to actually do all of the work that they need to do to take care of citizens. So seeking out those government contracts so that you can put in a bid for those, and they are required, they're required to choose many different sized organizations to fulfill this work. So don't forget to also go for those contracts. So many small and mid-sized organizations don't know that they're eligible for that, but that can be 20 to 30% of your overall budget. But the overall trend for small to mid-sized organizations is they overly rely on foundation giving.
So just to piggyback on that, I represent a small to mid-sized organization in a very large city. And one of the things that we had to do, because not only is it 40%, but in the larger metropolitan areas, it's even higher, 60, sometimes 70%. So what we have done and what I encourage other small and mid-sized organizations to do is start looking at your business model. And I'm not talking business model like we're in an accounting class.
Yeah.
I don't have an MBA or any of that. But what is the percentage of your contributed income versus your earned income? And this goes back to exactly what you were saying, Arian, that you have to have some kind of earned income. And earned income, there are so many ways you can have earned income that we don't even think about. And we don't spend a lot of time developing that. We spend time developing the contributed income as small and mid-size. And we have to get away from that model because it's not sustainable. It's not helpful. And as administrations changes and leadership at foundations and corporate leadership changes and priorities shift, that could in 1 year completely upend your budget because you're completely dependent on contributed income.
Yeah.
And contributed is, individuals, the corporate, the government, and the foundation.
Yeah, I think one interesting challenge that we're a national survey organization, so we don't qualify for at least we looked and maybe we're looking in the wrong places. It's been really tough. We also just hired a development person 6 months ago for the first time ever in the history of the 75 years of the organization. So that's been really challenging for us because we don't qualify for a lot of local funding. So I don't know if you have any
I mean, we're national, and I do get a lot of Detroit-based dollars from government and families. You have to figure out how you can create place with your organization. And I get, in each place that you serve. So we have money in New York, very specifically, right? Money for New York programming. Even though we serve nationally, we have pockets of programming in certain places, right? So you kind of got to figure that out. And I mean, I've served definitely in smaller organizations, $1 million budget organizations, built fundraising programs from the ground up. And I will say grant dollars are generally simpler to build on, just because individual giving takes time to build. And if you don't have a robust social media strategy, communication strategy, individual giving is more difficult.
Yeah.
People have to see you 7 times at least to give you money. And so if your social media isn't booming, you're less likely to have a lot of new individual donors as a small organization. But we don't have a lot of time, so I won't go too far.
Anyway, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add just one more stat too? What you mentioned, with individual giving, that currently most gifts go to religious institutions and hospitals and stuff like that. I think it was in Chronicle Philanthropy, an interesting note for you all who are really excited about engaging younger audiences. Know that with individual giving amongst millennials and Gen Z, giving to religious institutions is starting to decrease. So that's an opportunity for us to really think about engaging with younger folks.
And remember, the reason why people give to religious organizations is because the Bible says to. So that's competition as well. That's a trend.
Hi, my name's Tanner. I teach music theory at a small rural school in southeast Nebraska. So the way our program is set up is there's 3 music faculty inside a larger college of arts and sciences, and then we have a separate foundation that really does all the Devo work. So we just hired a new Devo director, and I guess my question is 2 parts. One is, how does the music faculty develop a relationship with the new people on the Devo side of things? And then also maybe how do we encourage faculty who maybe are more apathetic or burnt out to come along for the ride when we're such a small program and we really need all hands on deck?
So the first answer I would give is to the first part of your question is collaboratively, right? Like, I cannot say enough how under-maximized working together is in our sector. Like, just think about it. Small, mid-sized organizations, if they were sharing resources, how much more effective they could be at like doubling their impact in sharing and achieving missions. So the unapathetic faculty, get a group of them together, go over, meet the Devo person, and sit down with them and talk about like your aspirations, because that's what gets development people excited. And then the people who are unapathetic, I guarantee you, once those dollars start rolling in, yeah, that'll go away.
Yeah.
And I will add, as someone who worked at a foundation that was at a university, you also have to recognize that your development person has priorities coming from your foundation. So it's important to understand that too, and talk to them about what those priorities are and how you can work together to raise money within those priorities. Because if you have like a huge campaign going, they have to cater to that campaign, right? And also give them time to figure out the political landscape that they're working in, because higher ed has a huge political landscape that they have to figure out in order to get you dollars as well, especially from alumni and things along those lines. And then also, the people who are apathetic, I mean, you can't hold people accountable. They gotta, people gotta do what they want to do. So like, leave them behind in the dust.
Collaboratively.
All right, guys. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. But if you are interested in asking our guests more questions, feel free to meet them outside and shoot your shot.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.